one thing that I just love about this period is I love Zoom and I love being able to see more into people's lives. I love their cats. I love their children. Zach's whole family, we had a call earlier this morning and Zach's whole family came and said hello. It was very fun. So we'll wait just one more minute and then we'll go ahead and plunge in because we have lots to talk about. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Zach, do you think that's okay? I'm assuming it's okay.
Fire away.
Okay, we will fire away. So good morning, everybody. It is great to see you. Really, really wonderful to be able to be with you all. For those that don't know me, my name is Jackie Ogden, and I've been in the zoological world for something over 30 years. And most recently was with Disney, where I retired from Disney about 5 years ago from the where I was over the animal and environmental stuff. And now have the pleasure of doing consulting within our zoological field, including with zoo advisors. We have a number of zoo advisors folks here on the call. And so I'm probably going to miss somebody, but Zach Winfield is our vice president and also trivia host. And some of you will know what that reference is. And then we're not doing trivia today. Sorry, don't want to mislead you. And Kathy Wagner, who is formerly of the Philadelphia Zoo. And then Kathleen Khalil, who's, I always mispronounce your name. I know that I do, and I'm so sorry. And it's the joy of not being an auditory learner. And Kathy Yoon is our director of engagement. Is that right? Excellent, excellent. And I think, and I know David Walsh will be joining us, but is going to be a little bit late. And I think I got everybody. So we have a great team that helps put these together. And I think that we have a really great panel. And I think, so I'm hoping we're going to have a really good conversation. So I am now going to try to share my screen. And I think, Zach, you need to let me.
Right now.
Aha, excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, I am hoping you all can see a slide that has a cute cartoon on it that says, "My anxieties have anxieties." Good. So, so we have had, as many of you know, we've had several of these webinars now related to mental health in our community. And, I don't think that there is any question, but that, our teams, we are still struggling a bit with this. And recently I read an article that where mental health professionals were talking about this being sort of an unprecedented time of mental health issues. And there were a couple of recent articles in the New York Times, and I'll paste the references in the chat, that talked about where we are right now in terms of sort of mental health, and referred to it as that we're languishing. And that in 2020, everything was new. We really were dealing with grief related to the pandemic in every way. Our world's changing every way. And things are perhaps changing a bit, and more things are sort of going back to whatever the new tomorrow is. But nonetheless, we're still in this very weird place. And so they referred to this as languishing, which really is about, words like stagnation and muddling and foggy, not as perhaps as bad, as deep as the grief was, but still, people struggling. And our goal really is to be in flourishing, but clearly we're not there yet. So we also know that there are lots of changes going on. So, I'm hearing from many of you that you all are starting to put some things back in place. You're starting to talk about more people coming into the workplace instead of working from home, and all the challenges therein. That can be really tough for people. And so that is what we're here to talk about today. So um, uh, my apologies, there are the two references, and I will put that in the chat. So we have a great group of panelists with us. Rachel Barbano-Fried, who is a clinical psychologist and an executive coach, is joining us to share her perspectives on mental health, and we're very lucky to have her with us. Craig Jacobs, who is the Director of Human Resources, Safety and Security for the Omaha Zoo. Dave Rule, who's the VP of Operations and Campus Planning from Cheyenne Mountain, and I understand they had snow recently, which boggles my mind. And then Shannon McKinney, who is the Chief Animal Officer from the Blank Park Zoo. And so we have a great group. We'll be doing this with me asking a series of questions, and then we will have time for people to ask questions themselves. Certainly, if you want to put any comments, go ahead and do so in the chat room, and we will be keeping an eye on that as we go. So with that, we'll go ahead and plunge in. So I'm going to start with questions for Rachel as our sort of outside expert, not sort of outside expert, as our outside expert. And so, obviously it continues to be an unprecedented time. And, within your professional experience, I know that you have had the opportunity to experience many people that are going through stress during this period. And when you think about what we've talked about in terms of the zoo and aquarium community, both leaders, individual contributors, what advice do you have for our gang here?
Thank you, Jackie, and hello to everyone. So my name's Rachel Barbano-Fried. As Jackie said, I'm a clinical psychologist and an executive coach. And in both arenas, there's no question in my mind, really, in the mind of anybody that I'm like any of my colleagues, as you're saying, it's an absolutely unprecedented crisis for mental health worldwide, right? We started to see this even months ago, kind of rolling out of Asia, and now, rolling its way around the world. If we think about it, 14 months ago, right, our world as we knew it changed completely, right? The doors kind of clanged shut and we were sort of just told to deal, right? And I can tell you personally that, my colleagues and I sort of assumed that our work would dry up, but as most of you may have noticed with the advent of Zoom, right, that has been very far from true. Everyone that I know, and myself included, has a full roster of clients and many with waiting lists. And I've been talking a lot with folks in the last 2 weeks about how hard it is to actually remember sort of viscerally how scary and awful it was 14 months or a year ago, right? We didn't really know what was happening. There was a lack of clarity, and people felt really isolated and overwhelmed. And it continues to be a time of crisis for us. And I want to define crisis because I don't want it to be just sort of vague, right? A crisis is a crucial point involving impending change, right? An emotionally stressful event in a person's life. And although it's not the only crisis that we've been in, nor that we will be in the future, we are all in this worldwide crisis right now, and it keeps happening, right? We're living through this together. And I think one of the important things to remember is that crisis doesn't really build character, but it reveals character. So what I mean by that is that it's an opportunity for us to really step in to whatever roles, leadership, in our families that we inhabit, like whatever role you inhabit, it's an opportunity to step in to be your best self. I'm going to try not to get too nerdy sciencey. I have a tendency to, and so, but I'm going to try to stay on the, like, sort of the big picture. But one of the things to remember is that we've all been on high alert for months, right? And I probably don't have to tell you, but I will remind you that our amygdalas, our adrenal glands they've all been on overdrive for months. And our bodies are not built to be under this constant state of high alert. And so right around now, people are really starting to crash, right? And the thing that I think is probably one of the most important things to remember is that you can't be both anxious and calm simultaneously. It's just impossible. And so the work is to figure out, each of us individually as well as organizationally, how do we choose calm? Right? How do we use whatever skills we have to lower this chronic hyper aroused state? And it's super important in a leadership role, because all of our cognitive skills completely decline when we're in this stress mode. So that's one thing to kind of think about. And the other piece, and I know, Jackie, you and I talked about this a little bit, is that, we all sort of went into I don't want to use I'm going to use the word hibernation, although I don't know if that's really clinically correct, but we all sort of went into hiding. And some of us actually have started to get comfortable in being in our little Hollywood square boxes. And now that we're being required to come back into the world, there's anxiety around how do we interact with folks, and how do we kind of resume our lives in, step into this new normal. The best thing that I have found is to remind yourself that you need to ground yourself in your internal values: integrity, optimism, community, courage, purpose, compassion. Those are just a few that I listed out. There's really good research that shows that people with high levels of self-certainty, of internal integrity, are really better at remaining calm in comparison to those folks whose identity is drawn from externals, like external values such as professional status, fame, or financial assets. If you can be honest with yourself and then be honest with your coworkers about what you can or cannot guarantee or estimate or deliver on, you're going to feel calmer. And then that sense of calm is going to be communicated. Having a clear plan, as detailed as possible, while recognizing that things are going to change, right? It's really helpful because it helps to reduce cognitive load for yourself, having a really clear plan. I'm going to do this, then we're going to do this, and so on and so forth. Really helps to reduce the cognitive load for folks. And cognitive load is really important, because if you have this really high cognitive load, which is a part of what happens when we're under stress and duress, then we can't perform as well. We call that in the mental health world, in the psychology world, it's called psychological flexibility. And in the business world, there's a phrase called VUCA, VUCA, which stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, right? So you have to be both decisive and flexible. You have to be adaptable and willing to make difficult choices and maintain a sense of candidness with yourself and with those that you're working with. And this is also really true for me. This is an important thing for me. This is sort of, I guess, what I build my professional life on, is the idea of fostering connection. So if we can rally behind a shared sense of purpose, we're more likely to feel better about what we're doing. There's research done by this guy, his name is Chester Elton, and he wrote a book called Leading with Gratitude. And interestingly, he found that of the people that he interviewed, 37% of them said they will work harder if they are afraid of losing their jobs. 38% of them said they'd work harder if their boss is really demanding. But 81% said that they would work hardest if the boss showed appreciation. And what comes out is why people don't lead with gratitude, why people don't lead with the sense of like, we're in this together and I appreciate you for what you're bringing to the team, is because people, leaders and people fear that it is going to make them appear weak. So that's, I think, a really important thing to keep in mind. And then I wanted to talk just a little bit about some sort of ideas for individuals, because that's a little bit more thinking about like the organizational side. So for individuals, if you're feeling overwhelmed and the idea of sort of lowering this cognitive load, focus on the first 30 minutes of your day to set the tone for your day. Because remember, we will land where we point our vessel, right? So a really tight 30 minutes, and you have to be, again, flexible with trying to figure out what that means. But, 30 minutes for exercise, or 30 minutes for journaling, or 30 minutes for meditation. 30 minutes is a long time, so I don't suggest you jump in there. But bang for buck, the best thing that I can tell anybody to do is to cultivate a sense of mindfulness, because there is reams and reams of research, and I can certainly share with you anecdotally that when we are feeling overwhelmed, slowing ourselves down has the added benefit of calming our nervous system and bringing just changing the perception that we have of what's going on around us. Create a time if you're feeling, again, we're spending so much time in these boxes, so much time online. We're really, really busy, most of us. Create a time each day to engage in meaningful work with no distractions. So turn your phone off, turn your email off, turn your notifications off, set a timer and aim to work for 45 minutes. That's about as long as anybody's concentration span is without taking a break. And you can either do that for work or you can do that for something that brings you joy. So for instance, I really like to knit. And so one of the things that I have done in the past year is make sure that I have 10 to 20 minutes a day that I can just sit and knit. And for me, it's really become a meditation because it's very repetitive. It's really, I'm not good enough yet that I know there are some knitters out there that can knit without looking, that is not me. It becomes a hot mess if I do that. So it really requires me to be fully engaged in it. And then the last thing I would say is to double down on your recovery processes. And what I mean by that is paying attention to sleep, movement, hydration, mindfulness, and nutrition. And I'm a strong believer that if we have those 5 elements really, lined up and keyed in, everything else is going to feel a little bit more manageable. So I'm happy to turn it back to you. If there's questions, we can do that now or later.
So thanks, Rachel. That was great. And by the way, I've been taking notes. And so as those of you that have done this with us before, you know that we will put those notes together with some of the references we're talking about and things that end up in the chat room. And you will be able to see all of those later. So and Rachel, if I could ask you just to put in the chat room the 5 things you just mentioned, because I only captured 3 of them, that would be great. So thank you. And we will do questions at the end, and I'm sure people will have questions for you. So, but that was terrific. So now I'm going to turn this to Craig, Dave, and Shannon. And I would like each of you to talk a little bit about how you within your organization are proceeding into this, what we're referring to as the new tomorrow. what changes that you're making and how your organization is handling all of those changes. So Craig, Craig is driving to Chicago. So Craig, if you're in a place where you're safe to talk, do you want to start? And Craig, if you can start, you're on mute.
Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Excellent. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, the changes, in listening to many of the comments as Rachel presented those, I too was taking notes and listening to how this entire evolution has taken place in this pandemic. When we all use this term like unprecedented in the human resources arena, this entire sequence of events throughout this pandemic has certainly been unprecedented. And all roads tend to lead to HR. And so we've sort of reinvented ourselves as we are faced with the challenges that the pandemic has presented. Some of the things that have been certainly at the forefront, for instance, have been remote work. How are we going to manage remote work going forward? What is that going to look like? In our animal areas, there's been very little of that can exist other than record keeping. And so our animal care teams have been in place throughout this entire pandemic. And that in and of itself has created significant stresses for that group. All of those ancillary functions, education, administration, accounting, graphics, marketing, all of those, we've created work from home situations for them. But the question now becomes, how do we safely and effectively bring those groups back and begin to envelop those functions back into the day-to-day routine as our communities change and our zoos open. And so we're working through those challenges right now. One of the big things we've faced in speaking about remote work and getting everybody back is parents with children. How are the communities and the schools and daycares, how are they responding and at what pace? And then how do you accommodate young parents with children who are in those environments and getting them back to work or offering them options to help maintain their children safely? And so those have been some pretty significant challenges and things that we're having to rewrite and redo as we go along. I think the critical element for our senior team has been a couple of things: to be communicative, to make sure that we have become good listeners, and then to be responsive to the needs and of the employees as we hear them, and how do we respond to that? I talk about childcare, and I can use that as an example. When the pandemic first struck and we were forced to shut down and the schools here in Omaha all closed, the question became, what happens with kids? And so we were able to repurpose our education area and use some of those spaces for employee children to use as remote learning as the schools transitioned into remote learning. So we were able to use all of the technology that was there, incorporate that into the local school districts, and then allow our parents to have some comfort to know that their child was in a safe environment for remote learning. So when I say communicate, listen, and be responsive, I think that's an example of how we attempted to navigate that particular issue. I don't want to take up too much time. I'll move on to someone else, but I can certainly come back to those as well.
That's great, Craig. And I think those are three really key elements. So, Shannon, do you have anything that you would like to share?
Yeah, definitely. So coming at this from the animal care side of things, mental health and stressors and impacts were all there well before the pandemic. The pandemic has just made it more of a platform to talk about compassion fatigue, burnout, cumulative stress, all the things that our teams were already having to deal with and figure tools for. So when we're looking at it from the leadership standpoint and the things that we can do, first and foremost, care for your people. Care for them to the exact same level and passion that you care for the animals in this industry. Do welfare assessments. My team actually just recently took a team assessment to figure out how are we communicating? Where are our challenges? There are a lot of great ones out there. Some other things that we've been doing to help with the communication is our CEO sits down, and each director head sits down with our smaller areas, and every quarter talks about where are we financially right now? What projects do we have on the docket to help our recovery? Where are we with grants and funding, with donations? What do we still need? And then anytime we update protocols, so obviously as we were going into the pandemic, protocols and procedures had to be updated immediately, and then everyone was communicated with as those happened. But now as we're starting to come out, we have a little bit more grace period with changes. And so what we're doing is we talk about it at the executive level. Here's what we're considering. And then we talk with our teams one-on-one. Where are you at with this change? If we make this change in the next couple of weeks, what are the things we're not thinking about? How are you perceiving that? How does that impact your job and your safety and how you feel comfortable? And so really just genuinely caring about the people. And then from the leadership standpoint, and we do this within our team at the executive level, but also within my animal management team, what are you doing to take care of yourself? You cannot show up as a solid leader if you're not taking care of yourself. Just like was just mentioned was, sleep, be virtual and Zoom meetings and all of these things. I know originally in the pandemic, I was working 7 days a week. That, yes, in that immediate, okay, but now we're at that point where if you're still trying to answer email on your supposed day off because you're working from home and you're not setting office boundaries, you're not setting yourself up as a good leader. You're not showing up for your team, and then helping your team do that as well. So, I will give my animal managers a little bit of crap, and they're good with it. It's all in good humor. We've come to this agreement for one another to check in with one another. So if they answer emails on their weekend and it is not an emergency, I will kindly just say, hey, thanks for your response. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. We can discuss this more on your Monday, and just helping your team with that. We've been a lot more flexible with animal care hours, letting the teams decide what works for you. As long as the animals are out for our business hours, awesome. How much time do you need to open and close? How long of a lunch do you want to take? And really trying to provide them that flexibility. Oh, do we need to be more flexible with our staffing because one of our assistant supervisor, her daughter's doing remote learning and she only has one person in the area to support her. Okay, so what days do you actually need off and how do we make that work at the team level so the animals are still getting cared for, but so is your family? And so those are some of the things that we've been doing to really help support our teams. But those are things that as an industry, we probably should have been doing before the pandemic. And so really you shouldn't be changing your policies and your procedures. We as an industry have a lot of room for improvement. And I think the pandemic just showed that to us in probably a very aggressive way.
I think that is really well put. The notion that we have to say out loud that we need to care for our teams is pretty amusing, isn't it? We shouldn't have to do that, but yes, I completely agree. So it was excellent. Dave, anything you want to share?
Yeah, I'll approach it. My role, I have guest services as well as the facilities and the maintenance and all that. And there's a couple things that have really struck me. And a year ago, the word we used around here is, every day things change and you had to pivot and we pivot and we pivot. And then we got to a point sometime last fall where it actually just kind of settled in, and this is how the pandemic is. And we've spent the last year wishing for things to get back to normal. So now we're on that road to back to normal, or the new tomorrow, and now all of a sudden we're afraid of it. And so now we're having to pivot again as we start to roll back restrictions. And we approached it a little different here at Cheyenne Mountain Zoo. We're a smaller zoo and we run a pretty lean staff. So no one worked remotely other than an occasional day here or there the entire time. We came to work every day. We spread out our weekends so there were less people at the zoo when we were closed, but then we were only closed for 6 weeks and we've been open and using time ticketing with a cap, but we the other challenge that we have is, other than some snowy days in the winter, we've been selling out almost every day since we reopened. So we're coming into our busy season already tired, already worn down, and we can't hire people. So there's a lot of people that are maybe enjoying unemployment or have found work from home careers, and they don't want to be that frontline staff that's exposing themselves. So now our frontline staff that are used to working 3 or 4 days a week are working 4 or 5 or 6 days a week. They're already tired. They're already run down. And so to have to kind of pivot from that, and then we have the vaccines rolled out. A lot of people have gotten them. The mask rules get relaxed, but there are people that have chosen for their own personal reasons to not get the vaccine. So you have some of those that are still super nervous. They're nervous about the vaccine or whatever their motivation to not get vaccinated, but they're still nervous about coming down with COVID. Then you have the other end of the spectrum, some people that have been vaccinated that think they're bulletproof, so they don't need to do anything now. And then you have the kind of the group in the middle, they all have to work together. And so having the frontline employees that are having to react to all that way, they went, all last fall and winter being building attendants and keeping people from going overcrowding buildings and handing out masks, to now they're surrounded by guests. And we were at a point last fall where we had, in Colorado, indoors masks were mandatory statewide, but outdoors they weren't. But we were tracking it, and we were at 60 or 70% of people wearing masks outdoors and nearly 100% indoors. And as soon as those rules started to lighten up, I mean, it's gone to nearly no one wears a mask. And so the staff is really uncomfortable with that. And then we have a food and beverage partner, and that industry especially, like, we have concession stands that we still can't open because they cannot find restaurant workers. So it all really rolled around, it was a few people have mentioned, I mean, it was change. Then we settled in, and now we're pivoting again, and it's having those conversations and trying to do our best to accommodate. If you have somebody that is choosing to not get vaccinated, maybe they're in the admissions booth where there's glass between them and the guests, rather than working the carousel where you're face to face. We're having to try to make those kind of accommodations. And so that's kind of a new twist on it. And then, we're trying to staff up, and we're really struggling to staff up. So, I mean, the way I look at, the pandemic fatigue that we were all experiencing kind of over the winter is turned on, like I call it, like recovery stress. So there's a stress to coming out of the pandemic. And I think that process is going to be a lot longer reaching than anybody imagined. I mean, we all kind of, in our back of our minds, thought one day we're going to snap our fingers and the pandemic's going to be over. And that's not really how it's working. So I think that's it for this part.
Wow, those were all great points. And, I took a lot of notes during that as well. So, and I think that the not being able to hire people is such a significant thing. And I don't know that, I don't hear a lot of people talk about that around the country. So, one thing, Brian, related to that, I know that you on the safety committee are working with the HR committee on defining, developing materials on the fit to work concept, which is one that, really comes out of the sort of the safety realm, but I know you're working with HR to have it include more of the whole person. And so can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and Shannon, if I say anything wrong, correct me. So I know Shannon has presented on this topic a little bit as well in conjunction with the safety committee. So it came up, and it's a little bit, as Shannon had referenced, we had started the conversation around what we originally called the fit for duty before the pandemic. And it was really based on the safety side. and the animal care staff that's taking care of the more dangerous animals. The fit for duty term, we are trying to kind of ease away from because it connects to military and law enforcement, and they have some fairly well-defined meanings for that, and it's a little different for us. So I think more of a mental well-being assessment or just a self-assessment sometimes, and to start to be able to give our staff, and it applies not only to those that are taking care of the more dangerous animals, but sometimes it's the frontline staff for a little bit different reason, but to figure out ways to allow our staff to self-assess or come up with a way for an assessment that if I'm not on my game today, it may be that my dog passed away, or that, you know, I've been dealing with being short-staffed for so long and I'm just run down. And if I'm taking care of animals that are dangerous, if I make a mistake, there's a safety problem. And if I'm a frontline staff person that's the face of the zoo and the first thing and the last thing that people see, and I just can't fake the smile today, that's also an important thing. And to really start to develop tools to help our staff self-assess or have an assessment program, and then to figure out ways to be able to accommodate it. The smaller the organization, the harder those accommodations get, because maybe we only have one tiger keeper, or maybe we only have 2 ticket takers. And so to be able to say, well, you're not up to today, so you don't have to. Well, the tiger can just go hungry today and we'll just get less guests in. It really doesn't work that way. So it may involve some long-term thinking, like cross-training, to be able to back each other up and things like that. And with that, I think I'll pause and let Shannon talk, because she is a much more eloquent speaker on this than I am.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, so when we're talking about assessing our teams, we're also looking at assessing each person on a holistic approach. For whatever reason, our culture and our society believes there's a work version of you and a home version of you. And I think, Jackie, you highlighted it when you said you liked seeing into people's lives. As leaders, we've got to stop treating them as just employees. They are not a means to an end. They are human beings, they have value, and they bring them whole selves to work every single day, even if they're trying to compartmentalize. And so that's where this assessment gives leaders an opportunity to really look at the whole person. Just like when we do a welfare assessment for an animal, we don't just focus, oh, well, you know, it ate well, and we leave it at that. You know, there's 5 points, and some people's welfare assessments are even more detailed. So really looking at this from a holistic standpoint, and also what are you doing as an organization to support that? So if you do see that someone is struggling, how can you help them? How can you support them? What tools can you provide them? And do it genuinely. But then also, what tools are you providing for yourself? We actually recently, at the beginning of this week, had a very tragic incident occur with one of our animals. And it was heartbreaking. We lost a very loved and beloved animal. Yes, it was a hoofstock species, but she was quite the character. And it took multiple teams to respond to the emergency. And so we had to, you know, take a step back as leaders. I had my own team asking me, are you also okay? Because I spent the entire day making sure that my keeper team, my maintenance team, my vet team had food, water, you know, that they were taking the breaks they needed to take, that they were breathing, you know, that they were taking a few moments to process the situation. And so, you know, having your colleagues then also check in on you. And one of my colleagues looked at me and said, I know you know all the tools and techniques, but are you okay? You know, and really being there for one another. So that's really what this is looking at. It's not just, are your frontline staff squared away? Can they do their job? It's looking at, as an organization, are we healthy? And are we actually caring about the whole person and what they bring to the table?
Oh, very, very well said. And Shannon, we're getting a number of questions about whether or not you're willing to share any of the assessments that you use.
Yeah, honestly, I just use the opportunities to thrive. And you can use whatever you're familiar with in your organization. If you'd use the 5 freedoms or the 5 domains, I can share with you later, Jackie, kind of one of the a link to the tool that I created. I'm more than happy to do that. All I did was I plugged in the human inputs.
That's great.
So when you're looking at environment, you know, what about their home life? You know, when you look at nutrition, food, water, are they eating well? Are they drinking plenty of water in the day? When you look at physical exercise, you know, what are you doing physically, mentally, and emotionally to exercise yourself? So that's all I did was I just kind of take whatever you use in your organization, because your team's already familiar with it. They already know how to do that assessment. I just adjust the inputs to match the human side. And don't forget things like financial health, because that impacts your people. Even, you know, spiritual health, or whatever their connection is to the greater universe, those kind of things. Don't be shy away from all of those aspects, because that is the whole person.
That's great. And yeah, if you can share a link with me, then we'll put it in the resources. So that's terrific. Thank you. So we are now ready to open this up to our participants and any questions that you might have. So at the risk of making everybody a little insane, I'm going to be quiet for a second and let people speak up.
I'll just share that this session has done wonders just for starting off my day, and hearing that we're talking about these topics, and the idea of doing assessments, like welfare assessments for our staff, is like such an incredible idea. And this has just made my whole month. And we're at the beginning of the month, so it's made my whole month.
Wow, that's very nice. And I agree. I love the assessment piece. It's really cool. Excellent.
Jackie, this is Craig. If I could speak for a moment, we're using the Gallup Q12 as part of our assessment. However, the package that we purchased through Gallup Access allows us to do assessments. We can create our own questions. And Shannon, that's something that we've been working on as well. Just to create the kinds of things that we need answers to. We push those out to everybody, and then we analyze the results. And we're using that to continually monitor the pulse of our employees as well.
That's great. And Craig, if you can also send me, I can probably find that, but if you have a link to that handy, send it to me. Otherwise I'll find it.
Sure, I'll get it to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Great. What other thoughts or questions? What experiences are you having as you're moving into the new tomorrow? How are you helping your leaders cope? How are you taking care of yourself?
I had a question. This is Brian. Kind of a recent situation that came up involving what I believe is mental health fatigue, basically, but resulted in something that I think is a disciplinary issue as well. So the balance that I'm still working on, I haven't done the official meeting with write-up and everything, is how I can better separate the assessment of the person with the need for the disciplinary action on the back side of it. That I know they're separate issues, but it has to be both have to be addressed, and don't want to mix them so much that it gets muddled. I'm ignoring one part of it, having to enforce the other. Any suggestions on how I can really kind of address both of those within the same?
That's great question. Very challenging. So I am thinking that probably both Rachel and Craig have thoughts related to that. So either of you want to jump in?
I'll defer to Rachel on that.
Okay.
You can put your executive coaching hat on that one.
Well, I think it's the idea of both, right? And without knowing the details about the situation, what I would suggest is to be as clear and open about trying to separate them out, right? To have that be a very clear set of criteria for you. Like, I understand, I want to be, present for you as your, manager or whatever the relationship is. And I know that there are these concerns about you as the whole person. And we have to also address this disciplinary issue, and trying to actually be as open and candid and clear about that separation, I think is probably the best place to start.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was my general plan of action, but just wanted to kind of get validation on how I thought I should approach it.
Yeah.
I'll just add briefly to that. I make an effort to begin any conversation like that by making sure that I make it clear to that employee that there's a clear separation about what we're going to address. The discipline part will apply only to the behavior. We're attempting to correct the behavior with the discipline. It has nothing to do with you as a person. And so I try and make that clear distinction for the employees so they clearly understand that we're going to address that behavior and how do we correct that behavior.
That's great.
Right.
I'll piggyback on that. I totally agree. I have to have a conversation like that later today. And it's with a person that I have probably, one of the questions in the chat, I've probably gone a little beyond the boundary of just being supportive and been a little bit on the therapist side, though I'm not trained for that. But there are still sometimes disciplinary things that we have to address. And so I'm going to totally not even go down the road of any of the things that we've worked together on to help this person be successful. But right now we have an issue that has to be addressed head on, and the meeting is going to be only about that issue, because I don't want to blur the two. I still want to be able to be supportive once we move past the disciplinary part, but the disciplinary part is important, and it's really, it gets into the bordering between you want to offer flexibility, and especially with everything we've been through in the last year, but then there's a point where it becomes abused and it has to be put back in check. And those two things do need to be kept as separate as you can. Disciplinary part is never the fun part of the job, but it's important to do it well.
As we're speaking, and the three sort of responses, it's reminding me sort of like what we talk about in parenting, right? Where you have to set a boundary, you have to set the discipline, right? That people actually feel safer if there are boundaries, if there are expectations, and those expectations are kept. And you can be very clear about those expectations and very clear about the ramifications. We have to deal with this disciplinary action, but that doesn't mean that I don't care about you as a person. It doesn't mean that I think you're a bad person. I can understand that you have, and it's what we sort of hope to communicate to our kids, right? That like, we know they're going to be mess ups, but my job is to make sure that you stay on the right path, so that you're, able to, be your best self. But I don't approve of everything you do. I still love you.
Right.
That's great.
Yeah, I guess and that is really how I usually approach it. But I just thinking in terms of COVID fatigue, recovery fatigue, as like a very situational, very this isn't a normal, thing has happened because of what's going through. Is there a different approach, or are we still approach it the same way?
Yeah, I mean, I think somebody said it earlier, right? I have been talking about the COVID container, right? There's nothing that's been really revealed about personality during COVID. It's just that everything's kind of really intensified because everything has become that much more sort of smaller and, you know, more compacted. So I don't think that I don't think it requires a difference in behavior on your part. It's just trying to understand what are the different pieces that go in.
Thank you very much.
That's great. Brian, you touched on something that is also referenced in the chat room. And so I think it would be great to hear from you guys, and especially probably from Rachel, about, you know, how do you care for the whole person without becoming a therapist? How do you set that boundary?
I mean, that's a hard boundary for me to set. But as a therapist, right, I think the piece to keep, I mean, I use this also, it's like to be really aware of your own boundaries, right? And that's where we come back to this idea of being aware of your own, where are you, right? If you're overwhelmed, you know, Shannon, as you said, your folks were checking in with you, right? If you're overwhelmed by the person that you're trying to help, then you're both going to go down. You got to put your oxygen mask on first, right? So you have to set your own clear boundaries around what you can help with and what you can't, or what you're noticing, but is then their responsibility to actually manage, right? As a supervisor or a manager, if someone's saying that they are not getting a good night's sleep, you know, and they haven't slept for days or weeks or months, you know that they can't do their job appropriately. You know that they're going to be potentially dangerous to themselves or others, but you can't actually do anything about that. All you can do is offer them, right, to, you know, some feedback about how they might be able to manage their sleep better.
Great. Shannon, Dave, Craig, anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, I would like to piggyback off that. Something else to think about too is, as leaders, we have this really bad habit of having to fix. We want to fix everything, right? That's why we got into this role, so we can make decisions, we can fix, we can find solutions, we can solve all the world's problems. Yes? So when you're really just sitting down with your team, as far as a caring manager who values them, listen to understand, not to fix. You know, ask them questions. Like Rachel said, instead of trying to diagnose them or solve their problems, okay, tell me what's going on. You're really struggling with sleep. You know, I have a few tools for you, but whether or not they use it is completely up to them. You just have to watch their behavior from a safety standpoint. But as long as you're there to listen, to understand, and you truly, goes back to truly caring, and then you can set those boundaries and those standards about, okay, where is that line of, okay, I'm going to be, if you have a good relationship with your team, I know at least for me and my team, there are individuals that I can look at and say, you seem like you're really struggling right now. What can I help you with? What can I connect you with? Because this is beyond my skills. And being open and honest about that, being vulnerable about, here's where my skills ends, and I want to support you in other skills if you want it.
That's great. Craig or Dave, anything?
Oh, just always being keenly aware and understanding your moods. I think our observation skills on observing our teams and watching them through this transition is critical. And I certainly agree with Shannon's point, listening to understand.
That's great. So I know that Dave is going to have to sign off in a couple of minutes, and we're close to the end anyhow. So I'm going to ask our panelists if they have any last things that they would like to share.
Let me go first, because I know I do have to jump off pretty much right at 11. I think one of the most important things is that there's a lot of versions of this type of conversation going on. And one of the most important things is that the conversation keeps going. There's a lot of topics that are related that spiral off. And what we can't do is get past this pandemic and go back into our shell, because as Shannon referenced early on in this, we had some challenges in our industry with compassion fatigue and things like that that were brewing in the background for a really long time. And what we don't want to do is get through the pandemic recovery and then just put our boots back on and get back to work and forget that we had problems before. So the safety committee, the HR committee, the AZA, we're all going to keep this conversation going. And it takes everybody to be part of it and just recognize that your team does need this conversation to keep going. So I think everybody that was on the panel and everybody that joined, every format and every opportunity to talk about it is really, truly important. So with that, thank you everyone. And I'm going to go ahead and sign off.
Thanks, Dave, very much. And I couldn't agree with him more. I had one director say to me recently that they can't wait for this to be over because they're tired of dealing with the whole person and they want to go back to the way it was. It's like, oh, honey, you don't get to do that. Sorry.
So I'll add one thing also, because I also have to get off at the hour exactly. That, I've been talking with individuals and organizations around the idea of this is an opportunity, right? That it was not a wanted opportunity, but it is an opportunity because we had to shift, we had to pivot, we had to change. And now it's up to us to figure out, what do we want to take with us and what do we want to leave behind? And we want to leave behind, right, the burnout and the overwhelm. And so in order to do that, we have to continue to shift. And I think that you have like really great folks here, for, everyone else that was on the panel today, really knowledgeable, really caring. And if you can continue to talk as a group, right, to have this connection here, then the feeling of isolation and overwhelm will hopefully dissipate over time as we, learn how to take care of ourselves and our teammates, and that we'll be able to kind of go into this new normal, as you guys keep saying, caring about the whole person, caring about the whole team. And I just want to say thank you for having me. It's been really great to get to meet you guys. And if anybody wants to contact me, I'm happy to, I'm on LinkedIn and whatever, to be in contact if folks have questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel, very much. Craig, any last words of wisdom?
No, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think that this is the beginning of a very strong conversation that we must continue to have as we move our zoos and aquariums forward. And thank you all. I've learned a great deal today, and it was great to be a part of this group. Thank you so much, Jackie.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to you all. Really, really great session. We're having very nice comments in the chat room about people's appreciating this. And so really, really grateful to all of you brilliant people for joining us. That includes both our panelists and the rest of our participants. And Zach, do you have anything you want to say before we close out? Zach is saying no. Kathy Yoon? Okay. So with that, it is exactly on the hour. Oh, Shannon?
Yeah, I just wanted to really quick end with self-care, self-care, self-care. Take care of yourself first, and then genuinely care about your people. And yes, I'm glad this conversation is starting and gaining momentum. I'm sad that it had to happen this way, but at least we just need to keep the ball rolling.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Could not agree more. So thank you all very much. Thanks for being here. And I will see you next time. Take care of yourselves.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.